Great. Right. Hello, everyone. I think we are live. Hopefully we're live and hopefully you're receiving us. Hi, all. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon. So my name is Lucy. I'm the lead of Make Your Mark, which is the Arts and Health Service at Sussex Partnership Foundation Trust. And you are here in our virtual chatting room this afternoon on the Make for Tomorrow programme. So for those of you, if it's your first time here, big welcome to you, as to everyone, but particularly if you're new here, thank you for coming along. So Make for Tomorrow has been this extraordinary online arts activities. We started all the way back in September last year with an amazing programme of performers and actors and writers, and also some extraordinary visual artists who delivered some wonderful workshops and projects that people have got involved in. If you've missed any of it or some of it or bits of it, do go to our YouTube channel where we've uploaded all of the videos over the course of these months, so you can catch up on stuff. And there's a really lovely, it's like a lovely library of brilliant conversations and events. But yeah, thank you for being here. And this is in fact our last event of the series. So and we couldn't be happier to invite two extraordinary people into the programme this afternoon. We've got Haratio, Clare and Carlo Gebler, who will be chatting together in a minute. And yeah, we just want to say a big thank you to them. But before we do, I do just want to name check our brilliant partners, because it isn't just us at the Trust who've been doing this on our own. We've had two brilliant organisations who've worked with us to bring this brilliant programme together and create these opportunities for us all to come together, which has just been so important, particularly in these strange times where we've all been disconnected from each other. It's been a real joy to be able to share, albeit digitally. So yeah, I just want to say a big thank you to Hospital Rooms. They curated the visual arts strand of Make for Tomorrow, and brought in some brilliant artists who've done some fab work and created some amazing artwork together with all of us. And then also Arts Over Borders. So if you haven't come across them, Google them. They are fab. They put together, I mean, I won't be able to do it justice, but they put together these amazing events with writers and actors and musicians, often in bizarre places. So the place is as much the experience as the people who are kind of sharing a performance, which, I mean, I like to think is not so dissimilar to this, because although we've kind of, lots of us have got very used to doing things on Zoom and Go Teams and all the rest of them, actually it is weird, but nonetheless, we still can have this amazing human connection. So I'm going to shush for now and hand over to Haratio and Carlo. I've just got a really nice, Liam at Arts Over Borders sent me a really nice little bio about Carlo. Carlo in turn will introduce Haratio, but let me read this out to you. So Carlo, he lives in, oh my days, I'm really sorry. I know I'm going to pronounce this wrong. Enniskillen. Yeah. Enniskillen, there we go, in Northern Ireland. He's a writer of both fiction and non-fiction. His recent book was published last year and is called Tales We Tell Ourselves, a selection from the Decameron and his novel, The Late King of Thebes. The biography of Oedipus was written by his daughter and will be published in August. Carlo has also been a prison teacher since 1991, most recently working in Hyde Bank College, a young offenders centre in Belfast, an HMP.
McGabbery.
Apologies. Thank you. Where he ran a literature course with a focus on drama for prisoners serving long sentences. He also teaches at Trinity and the American College in Dublin. So, of course, we all know about Haratio, but also an amazing person who's going to kind of guide us through this afternoon, Carlo. So please do, we love it when you get involved. So feel free, at the bottom of your screen, there should be a little button that says, ask Haratio and Carlo a question or comment. If you've got any thoughts about what they're chatting about, if you've got any questions for them, please do click that little button, type it in and press submit, and it will come through to us here. And me and Carlo will pick those up and can hopefully feed them into the conversation. And nothing's off limits. You can ask anything, whether you've read their books or not read their books. This conversation is we love it when it's interactive, so do please get involved. Right, I think that's it from me. So I'll hand over to you, Carlo, and enjoy everyone, and I'll see you at the end.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Hello, Haratio.
Hello.
Nice to meet you.
Lovely to meet you.
Haratio Clare, I'm just going to explain to people, is a polymath, a writer of fiction and non-fiction, fiction for adults and children, a very, very, very well-known non-fiction writer. In fact, I reviewed one of his early memoirs, In Another Century. And you may also have heard him on the radio. He does these wonderful contemplative pieces on Radio 3, sometimes at Christmas, sometimes at other times, when he walks and allows the world to come through him and then out through your wireless. He is here today. I'm here today to talk about Heavy Light. And it's subtitled A Journey Through Madness, Mania and Healing. And it's a book which I would put in the same category as Stuart Sutherland's Breakdown. It's a book about the experience of anguish and an examination of the way the anguish is medicated and ameliorated and survived. So it's a memoir, but it's also polemical. It reflects on how our mental health services, stroke world, stroke tradition organizes itself and how it might organize itself better in future. I'm going to start off, Haratio, by talking about a phrase. When I read a book, I always have a pencil. And the pencil came out on page 15, where you have the memorable phrase. You say, madness is like a sunrise of the self. It's very striking, very alluring, and very troubling. What for you was this sunrise that is the heart of your experience described in this exceptionally remarkable book?
Carlo, you're very kind. Thank you for your introduction and for this question. So it attempts to be a sane book about madness, and I use the phrase madness deliberately and politically to sort of take away the different terminologies that we use for all its different shades. And I'm of the opinion really that anything, you know, from anxiety to insomnia to depression and to what I experienced are all forms of madness really. But the book moves through hypermania, that sort of state of racing thoughts and elevated mood and sleeplessness and grand ideas, to mania and then into psychosis. And I say at the beginning, you know, psychosis is a medically understood term involving delusions. And at the same time, you know, the Greek root is sick of soul. And somebody who wrote to me about the book said that his breakdown he regarded as a spiritual crisis. And I can see how these things have different, they're like dark crystals, they have many faces. And my experience of trying to describe it was I thought I want a very sane, very clear book about a very insane period. And the sunrise of the self came to me because it's not just the raging ego that makes it all about you. You know, the whole world is the sun and everything is revolving around your thoughts and your ideas. It's also a feeling of sort of fullness and interconnectedness, enormously powerful and beguiling. And you can't really stop it. You can't stop it. And my response to it was to pour on the booze and the dope and the sleeplessness and to make it go faster. And so it felt like everything I looked at was speaking back to me, which is, you know, in a very small way, when you walk out of your front door on a beautiful frost blue morning, that moment of sort of transcendent feeling of luck and fortune to be alive, but that, you know, jacked to a level something like crack or something, just terribly intoxicating and all blotting out. So they know, and I've experienced it, you know, that irritability and aggression can be part of that. And I think it's because, you know, they understand delusion. Progressive treatments like open dialogue understand delusions as a kind of language for the sufferer who can no longer bear reality. So I was carrying around this huge system of interconnected fantasy and paranoia, and working very hard to maintain it. And when it was challenged, like when it ran up against my partner, Rebecca, and she would say, "You're not well, you need help," my reaction was very swift from kind of euphoria to instant irritability and dismissal. It's like you're standing in the way of the sunrise. You're saying the sun isn't rising, but I know it is. And I think it's because you're aware deep down that it's a terribly fragile, you know, construction, and that it can't bear any weight of question or opposition. So that was what I was getting at.
You have this. What's so interesting about the? I mean, it's all interesting, but when you're describing the onset of the sunrise, is it's an incredibly powerful and positive experience. So you tell the story of your friends Chris and Natasha, and you somehow, not somehow, because you are Leah's fool, you're able really to catalyze their marriage. You're able to bring them to decide to get married because you speak what no one else wants to speak. It's blindingly obvious to you, and they just have to catch up. So there's this incredibly benign side to this episode of efflorescence, and at the same time, you speak about another wonderful line. A sensible metaphor for breakdown is the lost thread, the broken narrative of being, and you describe moments which are terrifying to read about and which are terrifying. After your first experience in the hospital in Wakefield, I mean, we will go through how you got there in a moment. You go to, I think it's Kirkwood Station. Nothing makes sense. It's literally impossible to understand the platform announcements, the platform numbers. So there's this incredible, you're in the midst of this roiling chaos, which is going to crush you. And it's these two things, both running in parallel, the wonderful and the less than wonderful, that you manage to communicate, and that are such a key, that is really the experience of the suffering. That is the heart of the suffering that you're describing, in my opinion.
It's very interesting that you used the word anguish earlier on, and I think that's right. We've all seen people on the street in the grip of sort of shades of psychosis, and occasionally they will say something to a stranger which is extraordinarily kind of penetrating. And Chris and Natasha were just other guests at the hotel where I'd gone to use the Wi-Fi. You know, we'd only known each other for 20 minutes really, or half an hour, when I said, "Have you asked her to marry you yet?" Which was wonderful. And that was the thing about the MAD, is we do say the obviously unsaid, as you say, but then that facility for patterning is so hyped that it runs out of control. And so when I went to Wakefield, the station there, Kirkgate, I wasn't sure if I was supposed to be following somebody, or was somebody going to give me a ticket, or I was waiting for a sign from these benign but all pervasive powers that are very common function, very common in delusion, the security services, aliens, celebrities. A lot of us have the same delusions. And it's clearly that the thought that it's really comforting that somebody knows you better than you know yourself, knows every fact. How wonderful really to have, a benign security service overseeing you, going, "Oh yeah, there's Clare. He's nuts, but we know where he's come from, and basically he's a good egg, and he's trying to do some work for us." And it really was living out a very kind of sub James Bond kind of bad le carre experience. But when that hits the simple reality of which train are you going to take to go home, I really couldn't do it for a long time, and in the end I became exhausted and just did the obvious. But you're right, and you work so hard to live in two worlds, and I know we're joined by people who know a lot about this, and having one foot in each world is exhausting and frightening. And there's a very good book, Jay Griffiths' Tristomania, where she talks about the sort of addictive side of mania and why people don't want to let it go. And in fact, my psychotherapist said to me towards the end, "I don't believe you'd even want to let it go. If I gave you a button to get rid of it all, I don't believe you'd press it." And it really shocked me, because of course I would. I don't need it or want it. Jeanette Winterson says in Why Be Happy When You Could Be Normal, which is also a story of a breakdown and a recovery, a terrifying breakdown, but recovery in the same way that I did, really, with therapy and reading and writing, which I know you know a lot about, and without drugs, that creativity and madness are not intertwined in any good way. Creativity is the answer we have to madness. It's our way of combating it.
As the energies gather and coalesce, and your mood and so on and so forth becomes stronger, you became gripped by the idea that you were going to be part of, connected to a universal school. You're this very, very powerful, and which was a wonderful, benign idea. And the place where you live, the place indeed I know from having spoken to you before we started, you came to believe would be an integral part of it. And you just tell us what you started doing, and then not long after you started doing that, what happened to you with your car?
Well, the fantasies grew and grew, really. And they were benign. It wasn't that they were out to get me. It was that they wanted me to do a piece of work for them. And I wasn't ever sure what it was. But it was about peace. It was about holding a great meeting in Hebden Bridge of world leaders. I saw Vladimir Putin in the park, a man for whom I have no great warmth, it must be said. But I thought everybody was coming together, and that all I had to do was, I checked the railway line for bombs, and I kept making sure that everybody was safe. At one point, I was in a hotel, and the people inside have never been safer than having a lunatic making sure that no one was going to blow them up. But it continued to accelerate, and I did. Well, first of all, I took my car up onto the moors, and I thought I never heard voices. I just misinterpreted the voices I was hearing. So on the radio, the radio seemed, if the radio was in a positive mood, then any fantasy that I had was being approved of. And if the radio was saying no, then any fantasy I had was being dismissed. And it has appeared to me that they wanted me to crash my car and stage a fake an accident. And I don't, it was quite dark. I thought that they were out to get somebody, perhaps a terrorist, and they needed a false trail. And part of me thought I was supposed to crash the car into the reservoir and then swim out of it. But obviously there was just enough self-preservation left. So I crashed the car, or rather I didn't. I got out of it and set it to roll down a hill, a hill with nothing at the bottom on the moors. And then I took all my clothes off and went running off across the road. And I thought I was supposed to go to a farmhouse. Can you imagine being inside that farmhouse? And I was sort of circling it, looking for a sign of where the way in was. And then I hit a huge number of dogs, all in cages. And they went ballistic, and lights came on, and I was suddenly very naked. I was just wearing my boots. So I jumped on top of this poor gamekeeper's Land Rover, and he came out and said, "What the hell are you doing?" And I said, "I think I'm in need of help." And luckily he called the police at that stage, but that didn't get me sectioned, because I sound like I do, and because I had a very persuasive narrative about, I claimed that I'd taken LSD by mistake. They let me out. I went cells in Halifax, first night in Wakefield in a secure unit, and released the next day after a discharge interview. And it took me attacking the ceiling here in the flat with a pair of scissors, thinking that I was supposed to join all the flats up and make a future world school, to give my partner, enough ammunition to get a really good social worker in. And she interviewed me, and I put up the usual barrage, and she saw right through it. And I was escorted. She made the order in the car and then said, "I'm detaining you under Section 2." And so that was me off to the hospital in Wakefield then.
And which we'll talk about now in a moment. But someone sent me a question, and they said, "Sorry, I've not yet read Heavy Light. Looking forward to it though. So, yes, please buy many copies of the book. But just wanted to know what led you to the point of being in this place of mania."
Thank you for the question.
Can you answer that?
Yes, a number of things, Carlo, I think. So I'd been diagnosed in France as cyclothymic, because I'd had a sort of breakdown, and the doctor there said to me, she was very good, French doctor, and she'd been in war zones, and she said, "What do you think is going on?" And I said, "I think I'm bipolar and I'm in the middle of a manic attack." And she said, "Well, you can't be, because you couldn't be talking to me now like this. So I think you're cyclothymic, which is a mild form of bipolar. You go up and down, and it can get worse. Or, it might not. It depends how you behave." And so that was what I think happens, is that I have this underlying tendency. And in the autumn of 2018, I was publishing 2 books. I was very ambitious for a job I'd started at the University of Manchester. I was trying to get home at the end of every night. I was just non-stop. And I was using marijuana as an accelerant, because I was trying to play I was trying to play the illness basically. And there are moments actually in Homeland, if you've seen it, where the heroine, who's bipolar CIA agent, will come off her pills to do a bit of extra sort of super work. And that's what I was trying to do. I had no means of controlling it. I couldn't stop, and it just got worse and worse. So pressure, external pressure, substance abuse, and internal proclivity to go up and down. And also, I think, particularly risk-taking behavior linked to lies and guilt and cheating in my relationship.
And your relationship is with Rebecca, and she features in the book hugely.
Yes,
so
very much part of it.
There's on the account of the day leading up to your going to the hospital in Wakefield. She is there, and we'll talk about what her opinions, especially her opinions about prescribing. We will come to that. Just you get to Wakefield. What happens to you? What do they do to you?
They were great. They were really great. And I interviewed people, and it's not in the book, actually. I make a vague reference to it, but I interviewed a friend who was sectioned in the same way in a very busy inner city ward in Liverpool, who said it was absolutely terrifying, like properly terrifying. Drugs, illegal drugs, violence, staff taunting patients, abuse, rape. As bad as it could be. And that was 2 years ago. I interviewed him now, and a year and a half. And I said, do you think it's still that bad? They've had a change of management. He said, yes, I would imagine it's the same tonight. But my experience of the hospital in Wakefield was wonderful. It was very calm, very well run. Staff were lovely, really trying. And we had a good group of patients. And I've interviewed the staff subsequently, one or two of them, and they have said, we get it too. We get days where you can feel it building through the day. You get a mismatched group of patients, and you can feel there's going to be trouble. And they've really had it. But I guess that's a feature of any secure unit occasionally. And what they did to me was they gave me 2 doses of quetiapine and just kept me quiet. And I, did breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And those 2 doses really, it was like pulling a plug. And I remember it was really physical. You feel sick and like you're being seasick on a ship at sea. It was bad. And yet, day 2, I wake up and suddenly the people in high-vis jackets out the back in the water cabins aren't surveillance anymore. They're builders. And so then you start looking at the evidence that you assembled during your mania for it being true. And you think, I don't understand, and you've got one foot in each reality, but you're being pulled out of the madness. So they said I presented as sane in about 60 hours. And as you'll know, Carlo, I mean, there's the philosophical question about what sanity is, and is it just what it appears to be? Am I still mad and just extremely persuasive and writing books? But I came back, and then it was a question of on what terms I'd be released. And as many people with us today will know, they have to be incredibly careful. And at the same time, they're working with very powerful tools like the sectioning orders and like the drugs, like the psychotropic medication, not all of which, well, not much of which is understood in terms of how it actually works. And I was surprisingly, to me, offered a choice of 3 pills, aripiprazole, sodium valproate, or lithium. And they said, choose. And I thought, well, why am I choosing? I'm the one who's just been mad. Why aren't you choosing? You're the psychiatrist on 160 grand a year. But it was honest. It was a very honest thing to say, which was effectively we prescribe by trial and error, which surprised me.
Do you think, I mean, you talk about the prescribing regime as one of consensual coercion.
Yes, that's what it felt like.
That one has choice, but at the same time, there's a duality to it.
There wasn't much choice. Nobody was getting out of there without taking a pill. They were clear about that. And they said, look, you can stop. It's your life. He was a very nice man, my psychiatrist, and he really wanted to help. And I get that, I was his responsibility. It was interesting, though, that the only psychiatrist who really listened to what I had to say and said, your assessment may be right. You may be cyclothymic with cannabis psychosis, wasn't clinically responsible for me. He was somebody I interviewed. And because he was on his own time, he gave me an hour and a quarter.
That's Mr. McRae.
Peter McRae, as opposed to the 15 minutes I had each time with the psychiatrist in hospital and then here in Hebden Bridge. each time as well, I didn't feel that it was really, I was really being listened to. I felt I was being guided, and that the guidelines had been set by the paperwork that came with me before I sat down in the interviews.
Mm. You do have this little aside. It's actually very early, but in the book, but it sets you up. You say, in the absence of a talking therapy in the hospital, we did what we could to improvise it among ourselves. So right from even before you get to the hospital, you set up the idea very clearly that there are different ways. There's the medical way, but there is also the talking way of getting at whatever it is, getting at the malady. And that's what the end of the book comes to, the different ways of getting at the malady.
Right.
Two questions have just come. One says, you quoting, presented as sane in 60 hours. Reflecting back, how does that make you feel? I think they're asking, were you surprised by the speed of the return to, in inverted commas, normality?
You're not given it takes a while. Nobody says anything, and they watch you very carefully. Obviously they have to, and it's for your well-being and for your onward progress. But it was one of the support workers who were brilliant, because in some way they're freer. When I saw people breaking the rules for the right reasons, it tended to be the sort of lower valued staff who knew how things worked and who got it and who had no side to them and treated you as equals. And of course the nurses want to, but they also said to me, the fact is we're in a position of responsibility and power, and that does draw a line, and also they have less time with you. So it made me feel great when I heard it, because that's what I thought, that chimed with what I felt. So that's the answer to that question. And then there's a question about, do you think finding ways to be honest about ourselves is part of recovery? I really think it has to do partly with narrative. I mean, the problem isn't it, that under the kind of medical, diagnostic and statistical manual method, we're described and then categorized, which then implies treatment. Spoke with a man called Ahmed Hankir, the wounded healer, who's a psychiatrist and a frontline doctor, who had his own breakdown, who identifies it as a breakthrough. It sees himself as bipolar, but in remission. So I don't really even identify as bipolar. I'm classically all the symptoms, of course, maybe more cyclothymia, but I don't find it useful. And my therapists because there is a division, isn't there, very crudely, between psychology and elements of psychiatry about all this. I don't find it useful in the way that they didn't. I see myself as having had a series of breakdowns for explicable reasons, and therefore am on a healing journey, which involves a lot of altered behaviors. So that's where I am with it. But that journey is beset, and particularly if you don't have such a strong narrative and sense of self, because it takes a degree of confidence. It's very difficult to be honest about yourself if your employer might look down on you for being bipolar, if the stigma of having had a breakdown or having been sectioned is going to affect you in your community or in your job. Very difficult to own that narrative, and B, to be comfortable with the honesty it requires. And my fundamental understanding is that our guidelines already say that we shouldn't be giving out even antidepressant medication without therapy. And yet we are, because we're under such pressure and the system's in trouble. And what my fellow service users really wanted was less the CBT that they were occasionally able to access, because they said that's all about going forward. What we need is someone to talk to us about where we've come from, who we can talk to. So what they wanted was the kind of therapy I had, trauma therapy. I had eye movement desensitization reprocessing, which I found along with other just therapeutic conversations incredibly helpful, transformative. And so I'm 2 years in now. I had a mild low in the winter, and I feel mildly high now in the way that I always have in the summer. And the book's going well. I've got plenty of reasons to be joyful, but really, I don't feel in any danger of another breakdown, I have to say. None.
someone's asked why you wrote about your mental health. Maybe we'll come to that right at the very end. I mean, and maybe I'll answer the question on your behalf. You're a writer.
Yeah, it seemed like a great story.
Writers write about what happens.
Yeah,
but
and being inside the hospital, it was a big part of healing, as the recovery of self-identity. I tried to start writing right then. I didn't, not very well, but I also thought, my goodness, that not a lot of my peers in the writing world have been sectioned.
No.
This is a good story. It needs to be told.
But your experience of healing as opposed to curing via therapy came later. I just want to go back to just the beginning of that time in the hospital in Wakefield, because first of all, you're there. You take the aripiprazole, and then you begin to go, oh, that man is in a high-vis jacket. He's a builder. He's not a member of the security services. There's a wonderful passage when you describe, I think it's day 2 or day 3, hearing a blackbird. You've seen a magpie the night before. So already the benign influence of the natural world is streaming in and working its magic. Then they start to let you out.
Yeah.
And you go to Barbara Hepworth Gallery.
Yeah, first the gym, which was a big one, because the different French mental hospital where I was for one night and ours where I was for basically two or 3 weeks was on and off on section 17 and voluntary and coming and going, was that they had a huge garden. It was outside Grenoble, and then a view of the Alps. It's jolly therapeutic. Whereas this one, really, we had 2 yards and you could only see the sky. And you did feel, I'm a very softy. I'm a great softy, and I've had a really lovely, lucky life. So I don't know what it's like to be in prison, although like you, I've worked there, but hardly at all compared to you, Carlo. And obviously you feel that very, very crushed in some way, that society says that this is where you've got to be, really. You can't be allowed any more than this. And so on day 4, whenever it was, we went to the gym across the car park. That was amazing, horizontal views. And then to Wakefield, to the Hepworth Gallery, when they were letting me come and go in the afternoons. And that was amazing, because it might seem woolly, here's a pill, quetiapine, and here's an art gallery. Which would you rather your child had? Well, for me, quetiapine in crisis, but then the gallery every time, because it reminds you that the world is big and beautiful and strange, and you're only a tiny piece of it, and that art is in somehow all time is in a good picture, isn't it?
I mean, I knew exactly what you were talking about. This interview is about you, not me. But very briefly, I summoned to the block. That's the punishment block in the prison, where a man had been for 2 years without contact and had stopped speaking, and also that he was heavily medicated. And I brought with me, for my first visit, Modigliani's nudes. And we sat at a table. He was cuffed. I turned the page. Next week, I brought Picasso. I turned the page. 45 minutes. Next week, Poussin. I turned. And after about 9 months, I started reading to him, and I read him a Scott Fitzgerald, Pat Hobby story about 2 men who go to a fancy dress party as a camel, and he started speaking. And that was entirely the art.
Bloody hell. And the teacher.
Well, no, nothing.
Did you come up with that method yourself?
Well, there was nothing else to do because he wasn't talking.
Yeah.
Now,
that's a hell of an approach.
But and I knew what the conditions were. And it has to be said, the people in the block were, the SO came and found me. I mean, he was seriously worried about what had gone on. But so when I read your Barbara Hepworth, you talk about, you read in the museum, Barbara Hepworth talking about driving and the shape of the land informing her as she drives around with her dad. It kind of comes into you. And then you go, I know the shape of the land because I grew up partially in Wales, and I'm infused with this sense of hillness. And that then, you look at other things in the museum, you're going every day, and that then, it begins something.
Yes. Yes.
Something really important. And you I'm repeating myself, you draw the distinction between healing and curing. You're keen on healing.
Yes. because that my condition, if I were to admit to it, doesn't admit really cure. You know,
No.
it says you can have remission.
And you're not really enjoying the experience of medication because it sort of blankets you.
Couldn't keep it up. No, not at
So
all.
you what do you do?
Well, I started researching, you know, like mad, first of all, and I dumped aripiprazole. It does have, there are records of it making people slightly manic, actually. You get excessive spending and sexual disinhibition. And if you look at the stuff I wrote for the Spectator blog at the time about the seasons, it's really overwritten and kind of, it's not me, it's not really my voice. And there were other things that I just didn't trust it. I didn't trust it because they didn't seem to understand it. They didn't really know how it worked or what it was doing to me. And I didn't like look at the side effects, and I'm not a brave person. And there will be many people I suspect watching who are on medication, and I admire you, you know, and often people taking it for others, for the benefit of their family, which is what Rebecca wanted me to do. And I admire that. But my research suggested that there are outcomes that can be good without medication, if you can afford them, which is totally wrong. And yet, you know, really good intensive psychotherapy. There's a question about altering behaviors. So we went back and dug up from my childhood what it was that made me perfectionist, made me want to take risks, made me want to, you know, have everything large, as it were, and also why I was a liar and what I was hiding and what deep doubts and misgivings I harbored about myself. And thanks to EMDR and this wonderful woman, we pulled them out of the ground. I'm not saying I'm cured of them, but I've really looked them in the eye and diminished them, I think. And so my altered behaviors involve really not lying, not smoking dope ever again. I mean, the book that you reviewed, Carlo, I said at the end of it, I'm not safe around it. The difference is that having been to a mental hospital, I'm now safe around it. And I've been around it with people smoking and I have no desire, because I do know where it leads now. I think cannabis is terribly dangerous for a lot of us. I mean, really dangerous. And I get a lot of sleep, you know, and therapy, a lot of sleep, making sure I don't go too fast, saying no to things, you know, not trying to please everyone all the time, which is great, but it'll kill you, you know, it's dangerous. So that's the sort of thing. And I'm moderate with spirits, and my partner and I have come to a very honest place. I mean, they're talking about a film. I mean, I doubt that it'll be made because films never seem to get made when it comes to my stuff. But we realized that the key to the whole story is Rebecca, because for every one of us who has suffered, there must be 5 or 10 people around them, or 1 or 2 at the very least, who also suffered and who tried to help and who want us to be better, and who are as much victims of a system that doesn't entirely work as any of us. And Rebecca's experience was brutal. I mean, can you imagine trying to get a persuasive git like me to have treatment, and then trying to get a lying and evasive git like me to take his pills? And I lied for months about it. She said, if you don't take them, you're done. You know, you're not seeing your kid. You can bugger off. We'll work this out, but you know, it'll be me in control. Go. And so I thought, we can do better than that. And I lied. And then when I spoke to this wonderful woman who's an open dialogue practitioner, which was one of the things my research threw up as something that works, that really works, she said, lots of people do that. A lot of you lie. What she kept saying to me was, it's normal. And it wasn't just the lying, but when I was saying, but how would you have treated me when I was being, you know, controlled by MI6 and aliens and due to marry Kylie Minogue? And she said, I would have said to you, these are completely normal reactions to the stress that you're under. They have an 80% success rate, you know, with very limited medication, of returning schizophrenic and psychotic people to work within a couple of years. That's against a British average medicated around 15%.
Right. Those statistics are extraordinary.
Yeah, and I really checked them because I did a piece for the FT and they were ruthless about it. And so I'm confident in that, you know, the open dialogue statistics are still being questioned, but the anecdotal evidence is absolutely, totally convincing, and it's being rolled out. If there are any GPs here or anybody really, we should be writing to our MPs and to the directors of our commissioning groups saying, can we have an open dialogue trial? Because I don't think it'll just help the people at the deep end. I think that way of seeing will also help anxiety, insomnia, you know, depression. It's all about talking.
because what you discovered is that you through talking through EMDR and through talking to your psychotherapist was that at some crucial point very early on in your life, you split yourself into the person who was there in the room and somebody else who was thinking, calculating, monitoring.
Devious bugger. Oh no.
But because of the complex and sometimes unhappy and even occasionally traumatic experiences that you had in childhood, you put yourself into these two different things. And what you discover is that your behaviors are wired into this. And you can't undo them. They can't be magicked away, but they can be, well, they can be turned into art, of course. They can be accommodated or negotiated with. I mean, and essentially the prescribing route doesn't do that.
No, it does symptoms. It does symptoms, not causes.
And the only way to do it is to do it, is to get in the room and, talk. And as Freud said, turn neurotic misery into common unhappiness. I love Freud. He's such an optimist.
Causes.
The thing is that it's a very carefully argued book, because you did stop taking your medication. You didn't tell Rebecca for a while, but then you did tell her that you hadn't. You clearly understand that sometimes it's necessary or important.
In crisis.
And in crisis as a stabilizing. But you're also arguing for, what are you arguing for? Tell us in a.
Well, I think it's a bit like a defibrillator. So if you're crashing, if your heart's going, then what you really need is the defibrillator. And that's what the medication does. But what you don't need is a defibrillator every day. And I think that the evidence suggests that our outcomes aren't that much better 100 years later than they were. I think our language is very difficult. I think it's very difficult not to see, once you're told that you're a manic depressive or that you're bipolar or that you suffer from anxiety, very difficult not to let that label determine who you are. And yet, and to make you feel that you're not like everybody else, except fellow sufferers. And yet, the British Psychological Society is very clear on the power, threat, meaning framework that actually we're all on a continuum. And we subject any of us to the same pressures, either in childhood or now or tomorrow, and we'll surely go down some of these roads. I don't think there's any mystery about what gets us there. I think the mystery is often to the person themselves, and that's why we need talk to help uncover the mystery. So I'm not anti-psychiatry. I think that they're trying to help, and I admire them. And I'm not anti-medication, because it's miraculously effective, particularly in crisis. But I'm anti-over-medication, and I'm anti the kind of psychiatry which feels that it has no choice but to send you down those roads. And having corresponded with a lot of practitioners and sufferers in the last month or so, as well as the research for the book, I've come to the conclusion that nobody's condition is like anybody else's, and that the categorizing of, the categorizing approach that we've been taking is flawed, deeply flawed, and that we need to be treated individually. And so this is a wish system, and those people who work in it know perfectly well how far away we are from a wish system, but we're never going to get it if we can't clearly articulate what we want. And I think what I would want for people that I love is that they be treated entirely individually with a mixture of therapy and, if necessary, medication and social prescribing, so that no one's condition is the same as anyone else's, and no one's treatment is the same as anyone else's, and no one's treatment is one-dimensional. Because who wouldn't take a pill that would save you and your family? We'd all do it. And yet we know, outcomes-wise, life-wise, pills-wise, it isn't very successful, not compared to, our brilliance and our resources and what we deserve, and our experience as a society, which practically thanks to COVID, we're now talking about so much more openly. So I think we need to articulate a much better, less taboo-ridden, less binary vision of what well-being is, and start from the ground up and across the spectrum, because somebody very wisely said depression is a sign that something is wrong. Well, soaring rates of mental illness across the board, or at least soaring experiences of mental illness across the board, that's a sign that something's wrong, fundamentally wrong. In fact, in Grenoble, I did a piece for the BBC. They decided to make a city fit for children, for children's mental and physical health. So the first thing they did was take down all the advertising. They tore the adverts off those beautiful French columns and out of the buses. If you own a shop, you can have A4 in the window, that's it. And the result is a very calm place where you're not lied to, where you haven't got women in underwear, 6 feet tall, 8 feet tall, where you're living in a much more peaceful reality than, and just by that tiny tweak, to then take that onto screens and notifications and false consciousness and the way that, Boris Johnson's crew would like us to do away with society and run after higher salaries, all of which we know makes us miserable. So we could see mental health not as this great wave that's coming to sweep us away, but as in some ways it's a guiding light. Look to where the good things are and build towards them.
Somebody has asked here, they've said that we generally see being in control as a positive.
Yes.
But how have you responded to that in your experience? Do you think being in control is a positive?
That's so interesting. It's an illusion, isn't it? I mean, we're so not in control. The things that we can control are very minor, and we're so subject to every kind of pressure. I learned from open dialogue about this idea of the kind of dialogic approach, where you sit with your own uncertainty. So how it works is clinician, sufferer, couple of practitioners, ideally psychiatrist, the sufferer's family and the sufferer all sit around together, and they all share their anxieties, and no one tries to hand them over to anybody else. Or, so the psychiatrist say, I'm really not comfortable with you leaving today without taking something, if only for tonight. And that's how it works. And by everybody saying, well, look, I own my uncertainty, I don't know, I'm not really in control, they find that everybody's able to move more gently and more progressively together. So I haven't thought much about control, but it's certainly an interesting one, and it's very stressful. We had a dog, and Rebecca got a trainer in, and the dog said there are a lot of stressed dogs in this country. Do you know why? Because naturally they're low-ranking dogs, but because they're not properly trained, they think they should be in control. So they're having a hell of a time. And there are moments where you think, I mean, it depends, doesn't it, Carlo, on things like faith. Some of the happiest people I know ascribe control to other things, like a sense of what is good or what is right. And then if you're at the service of something, I think it's very difficult for us as individual humans to feel that we have to be in charge of reality and existence. I think that's really painful and hard.
But what one gets from your book is this really strong sense and argument for the following, which is that everyone's anguish is specific to them. And therefore, when it is addressed, it has to be addressed in a way that is specific to them. The generalized approach doesn't work. And actually, you make the argument that it is definitely going to be more, in inverted commas, economic in the long run.
Sure.
But it might look from the outside cumbersome, but it isn't. The other problem, which of course you're alert to, is that we don't live in a world which is interested in the greater happiness of its citizens. We live in a world, or in a country, the United Kingdom, which is interested in the management of its subjects. And that's a completely different thing. You include an interview with Jenkin.
Andrea Jenkins, MP.
Andrea Jenkin, Tory MP, High Priestess of Brexit, etc. And you posit to her that, do things a bit differently and maybe provide more funds. And she comes back quick as a flash. Without austerity, think about it, we'd have been so much worse. And you read that and you think that you didn't listen to what Haratio was saying. But okay, you're a politician, that's what politicians do. But we do live in this political environment. How can these dunces be persuaded?
They can't. They're so ideological, and they listen to you through, as you know, Carlo, through a filter of calculation. It's simply not happening. I think it's my generation, 40-somethings, there's definitely some good people in there, but not very many of them in control. I think they're very hidebound by the party structure. I think we'd need to elect better. We need young people who are of ability to select politics rather than the myriad other things. You know, if the people working for Google were elected, we'd be in business, I think, and unelected, you know, deselectable. But I think it has to come from the ground up, particularly with things like health, and that they do respond. You know, when there's an overwhelming demand for something, they have little choice but to respect it, at least in form. I'm hopeful, but I'm more hopeful that people will start to ask this. You know, this is actually what we want, so give it to us. And we need to be better at organizing around what we actually want, rather than being organized around what somebody else wants, which was the terrible. I mean, what I think Brexit was, that there was a revolutionary moment coming. It was clear, and that could have been, in a way, it could have been Corbyn's moment. But it brilliantly, a fragment of the establishment just redirected all that energy, which was actually against globalization and against many things that are very bad in many ways, and turned it against the people themselves. Mm-hmm. So we've watched coups being staged. A couple of, you know, benevolent coups wouldn't be bad, would they?
No.
And doable.
It seems to me that the hope lies with the practitioners. There are various individuals, Joanna Moncrief, Mr. McRae, the people that you meet, the open dialogue people, and gradually they are changing. They are inside the belly of the beast, and they are changing it from within.
Yeah.
And the very fact we're having this conversation is an indication that there is something going on. Yeah. We are moving from a prescribing to a deprescribing. We are moving from a medicalized to a holistic. I mean, I know those are woolly terms and generalized terms, but we are sort of sliding.
Yeah. The more people know about it, the more they'll demand it. Yeah. It's fascinating at university, because actually, so I teach at one, a good one, or at least a very good department within one, and it's that the higher structures are terrified of the students, actually, because the students are other money, and it's their experience, and it's what they say, that everything depends on them. So were we to start asking for things that we really wanted, I think it would be harder and harder for us not to get them. And those people now in the system, from doctors to psychiatrists to psychotherapists across the board, who are doing new things, you know, they're working against practice, they're working against orthodoxy, they're almost certainly working against time and money, and they're heroes, and they need help. And people like journalists, we have a role in that, and pretty well all sections of society have a role to be slightly less cowed and slightly more idealistic, I think, and demanding, because it's fascinating how often things like journalism, we don't serve in the ways that we do it the people that we're supposed to be. You know, we serve the wrong instinct. Look at the Daily Mail, an absolutely extraordinary machine for attracting people's eyeballs and attention. And yet, you know, it could be a force for mighty good. All of those mechanisms could be a force for mighty good, were it not sort of the habit of the other. So, you know, I think we have wonderful things. The BBC, for example, I think is wonderful. I've got huge hope in all sorts of sections of society. I know there are good practitioners in every version of it. But we need to give the young hope, because I think there's a real despair around, and I think despair just sends people into their phones.
I too work in a university, and I think the young have had an absolutely rotten deal.
Yeah.
The mobile phone and what it does is catastrophic.
Agree.
Whilst I'm here, you know, which I have huge personal experience of, cannabis, especially hydroponic skunk, oh my God.
Yeah.
Or, oh my goodness.
Russian roulette. It's Russian roulette.
You know, please, please, please don't do it. I spend a lot of time, or I have spent a lot of time on the wings saying, please don't, not good.
Yeah.
I think that, are you hopeful?
Massively.
Right.
Yeah, the woman I talked to, Yasmin Ishak, rolling out open dialogue in Kent and Medway, has now gone to London and is rolling it out there. It will come, and I'm hoping that it won't just be for people at the deep end. I think versions of that. Thing is, we already know, the nice guidelines are you must have therapy if you're having antidepressants. We often know the theory. We just need to catch the practice up with it. And that will give us all hope then to move towards, the really interesting ends of the theory, which, look at the local governments. They say, well, how are you trying to prevent misery in Halifax, chief executive or chief constable? And they say, well, we know what we need to do. We need to get buses for the young so they can get into town and see each other. We need to have proper facilities, proper arts organizations, proper spending. But our budget is being cut to ribbons. And so they're fighting this battle to make Calderdale, for which see any part of Britain more livable, against horrendous central government austerity and cuts, which is taken out on the public sector and on the people who need it most, which is outrageous, And it's not until you see it from the eyes of the person who, there's a reason why there's a guy on the bridge in Halifax tonight who wants to jump, who's probably facing a police officer who isn't trained to negotiate him down, but may well have done it before because the negotiator isn't here yet. There's a reason why it's harder to jump off that bridge now than it was 2 years ago. And there's reasons why he's there, and he's been failed. It's not that he was born with something wrong with his brain, because there is nothing wrong with the brain of a sufferer. The chemical imbalance theory has been debunked. It's the society and the structures in which they've grown up massively, I think, and things like skunk. So I'm hugely hopeful, Carlo. Hugely.
And the government's failure to fund properly. To bring us back to Andrea Jenkin, they just have their housekeeping analogy. Well, we're going to go into debt, so therefore we've got to retrench and pull back. And it's nonsense. I mean, when they need to, they can quantitatively ease till the cows come home. But suddenly, when it's mental health or the National Health Service, oh no, that's a different. Actually, you're not going to have any money. Somebody has asked me that in the film of the book, who would you most like and least like to play you? And before you answer that, I would say to the person who's asked this question, I think probably having read the book, the person think about who is to play Rebecca first.
Yeah, funny, that's the conversations we're having.
She represents the woman on the Clapham omnibus who is
a superwoman dealing with a nightmare and bringing up the kids and looking after her own self-care and being gaslit by the services, which was saying, the front end, who think we don't want this guy and he's not as bad as the other lady down the road who really needs the bed. So they're telling her, well, it's drugs and alcohol. This isn't mental health. And she's saying, you're wrong. And the message that she wanted to say to the families, if there's anybody watching, was that you mustn't let that you've got to own the narrative. And if you're right, then you just got to push. And it's hard. I mean, it's really, really hard. And the other thing I'd say to anybody who's a family member, and I'm sure many of my fellow service users would say the same, is that sectioning somebody is the kindest thing you can do if you're happy that the place they're going to is a place of safety, i.e. it's not a nightmare ward.
Yeah, so it can't be like,
If I had to section my brother, I would, but I would jolly well go with him in the ambulance. I would make sure that he was being handed over to someone that wasn't chaotic and mad. And I would kick up a hell of a fuss if he was. But having said that, I the care that I got from the system, everybody was trying to do their best. It was really moving. It was wonderful.
So who's going to play you in the film?
Well, he's dead, but the idea person would have been River Phoenix, who I think was a brilliant actor who really understood all of that. And when I was young and pretty, somebody used to say I looked like him. So no, I don't. The thing is, all of my books have attracted film and TV, but they never ever happen. What happens is radio, and that's where I'm most happy. I love radio.
Someone's asked if you could just speak very briefly about your radio walks, and they've said, apart from the pressures of making the program, I presume the technical, turn the machine on.
Yeah, have a genius who does that.
Oh, great.
You know what it's like.
Yes,
they are very good. Yeah.
Were they therapeutic, those walks?
Massively, yes. In fact, the Greenland Sound Walk we did at the end of the year. So the beginning of the year I was sectioned in January, came out in sort of January, February. In September, my father died. And in October, November, I was walking across Greenland with a producer and a recordist, a studio manager, engineer. And it was the most wonderful experience for all of us. And it wasn't that somebody asked me, were you kind of high? Was that like a manic high? I said, no, you should have seen the other two. You know, we were walking across Greenland and along the Arctic Circle Trail. It was extraordinary. It was wonderful. And I heard somebody else on the radio saying the other day that we're hardwired as kind of nomads, really, originally hunter-gatherers, that we love and need shifting horizons. So we've all rediscovered nature during lockdown, but what we really need to do is, I think, rediscover it a little bit down the road, because it makes such a difference. And yes, I find it, one of the brilliant Matt Walsh, who was a GP and then chief executive of called a commissioning group, said, we know exercise affects fundamental changes in the brain. It's as powerful a drug as you could wish for. So exercise in nature.
Someone wonders whether society understands what psychosis is. I think I can answer that question. It's probably not.
Yeah.
The answer is no. And then they ask, how do we improve understanding?
I think we all need to be more honest about the conditions that assail us. Ahmed Hankir said that some of the people he treats say they find the stigma worse than the condition. So that's a problem, isn't it? It's all very well for us to say we're more open about our mental health. I find mental health difficult as a phrase because I think it scares people. Well-being is a good one. But the more we can all see it and recognize it in ourselves, but also in the undiagnosed multitude. The fact is, we all have moments of madness every day where we have a mad thought or a flash of rage or irritation. That's just the same brain, the same bit of our soul. And I think the more open we are, like I worry about the word triggering because it seems, but I get it. You know, everything can be triggering to somebody depending on their experiences. So I think a recognition that we're all on this continuum and that it's fine, that it's normal, that madness is a normal part of us. I think that would help.
Well, as Mr. Whitaker says, you know, to suffer is to be human. That is it. That is the truth of being a human being.
Yes.
You will suffer.
Yes.
And the nature of your suffering will vary, but you have to deal with it and accommodate it and not stigmatize and medicalize it.
And not panic about it too. If somebody close to you can't sleep, you know, that's something you talk about. It's not something that you panic and medicate necessarily.
Well, you've been
very lucky to talk to such an extraordinary man.
No, I was going to say you've been wonderfully,
fundamentally lucky.
You've been beautifully fluent, and I can see that from the you know, the iteration that streams in, that people really are enchanted with your openness and your honesty.
Thank you, God.
As am I. And I think that to go back to how do we make the world a better place, that's where we start. I was very struck by what you said about Grenoble, no line. And the trouble with the political culture in which we currently exist is that its foundations are deceit.
Indeed.
And if you surround people but with deceit, they get sick.
Yeah.
It's toxic.
The sanest of us that appear to be mad. Yes, it's true. It's true.
Can I just say thank you very much?
Thank you.
This has been marvelous, and
thank you for giving such time and attention.
And a great book. So, ladies and gentlemen out there, I can't see you, but you can buy this book. It's got a very nice cover with a picture of a.
It's the eye of a bird of prey. I think it's the eye of a red kite. It's ferocious. Yeah.
Yeah. It's got a red kite on the front. Yeah, there you go. There's the red kite. And you know, if you buy the book at Amazon, that's fine.
Or a library, or wait for paperback. It'll be out. It'll be cheaper in a year's time.
Or go to a small independent bookshop.
That's very kind of you. Thank you for your time, for coming, and for having us. Cheers.
Good luck.
Thanks. You too, with your great work.
Thank you. I think they stopped.